I think we'll go ahead and, okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Um, One of the challenges of working in archives is always stumbling across something that you want more information on. And so today we're going to be talking about post office murals. And I didn't know a lot about these um, until 2019, when the post office decided to issue a set of stamps honoring post office murals that were done in the 1930s and 1940s, and that led me to a study about murals, as well as finding out whether there are any in West Florida. The 10 stamps that the post office issued showed murals that existed in post offices and the town where they are. If you on this one slide, if you'll see, there's one of the murals was titled, they called it Airmail. And if you look at the picture of the post office, you can see this little post office with a window on the left, a door, and the gold lettering above the door always says postmaster, and then the mural was put above the door. And we're going to be coming back to this, but this is the standard way that buildings of post offices were done by the federal government in the 1930s and 1940s. They had a standard blueprint, and the lobby consisted of this one door that said postmaster, and above it is this space above the door, and this is where the murals were painted. The stamps that came out had a number of murals on them, and Sugarloaf, and usually the murals were taken from a local history or something to do with the area. And so one of the stamps was Sugarloaf Mountain, done in 1940 for the post office in Rockville, Maryland. One of the stamps showed Antelope, painted in 1939 for a post office in Florence, Colorado. Um, this one was titled Mountains and Yucca, uh, made in 1937 for Deming, New Mexico post office. And this one, another stamp showed this here was Moving Camp, uh, done by Stephen Mopope, artist in Anadarko, Oklahoma. And that led me to the question about whether or not there were post office murals done in Florida and whether or not they are still in existence. And so I identified these towns where post offices were built in the 1930s and into the 1940s, where where murals were painted into the post office. We're going to come back to this and talk about why or how they were, but we do know that there are 14 of them, at least 14 of them. Some of the post offices have more than one, and we'll see that. About 21 of these murals have survived. Well, how did all of this start? Well, we often date the Great Depression from the collapse of the stock market on October 29, 1929, but in reality, there was a domino effect of many different issues. In the 1920s, the stock market experienced rapid expansion and also wild speculation, reaching its peak in August of 1929. But production had declined, unemployment was rising, there was low wages, proliferation of debt, and in September and October of 1929, stock prices began to drop, with the market totally collapsing on Black Tuesday, October 29, 1929. Billions of dollars were lost, thousands of investors were ran out. And this kind of domino effect led to, by 1933, half of America's banks had failed, and employment was approaching 30% across the country. Now, Herbert Hoover, who took office in 1929, was blamed for the crisis, and then he was soundly defeated 4 years later in 1932 by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. No one knew what Roosevelt would do, but he was a buoyant, optimistic, kind of a paternal tone and humor, and he enchanted the voters. And he took office on March 4th, 1933, and his first inaugural address was very solemn, but we all remember him for saying that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Using the resources of the federal government, the use of executive orders, and Roosevelt with Congress created one of the most massive federal bureaucracies ever seen, using Treasury borrowing to plow federal dollars into projects and activity that would provide income, support, and stability to the lives of many Americans. And a whole plethora of federal programs sprang up, many of which are still with us. And this is a list. The first was called the First New Deal, 1932 to 35. You see all of the agencies come into existence. The FDIC to protect banks, SEC to investigate stock fraud, and so on down the line. And I'm not going to go through all of these initials, but many of them are still with us. And then, of course, the second New Deal, the second term in office, we have other things, including Social Security, soil conservation, all of these things, and many of them are, of course, still with us. Now, a childhood friend of President Roosevelt, George Biddle, is credited with the idea of suggesting to the president that some of these programs should help art, should have the arts in the New Deal program. And so they launched a number of them, including the Federal Arts Program. The Federal Arts Program was housed within the Projects Administration, WPA, which was the arm of the federal government that built in 8 years of operation, 4,000 new school buildings, 130 hospitals, 29,000 bridges, 150 airfields, and many other federal structures. The Escambia County School Board building at 215 West Garden Street was one of these that recently was torn down. The property was sold and that building was torn down. But there are these WPA projects throughout the country. And included in the WPA was the Federal Art Program. It was a roster of artists who were called upon to provide federal art in buildings built by the WPA. And some of them but it wasn't part of the WPA Act. The post office building were built by the WPA, but the paintings of all this were handled by the Treasury Department. And the whole purpose of the program was to select high quality art to decorate public buildings, and then they awarded commission competitively. And most of it was done for post offices. 1,300 such murals were commissioned by artists throughout the country and installed in new post office buildings, and 300 sculptures were also commissioned for this thing. This idea of using a bit of your building money for art is still with us. We use this at the University of West Florida. We've done this with every new building on campus. We commission a part of the appropriation for the building for artwork. Here in the library, we have artwork in our stairwell, at the end of our hallway on the first floor. These were all paid for with the kind of an extra rider to cover art. So this section of the Treasury Department, they employed artists, army of artists all over America, decorating nearly 1,200 post office lobbies with art. And these are two examples right here. And again, this is the same standard post office building where in the center of one wall you have a beautiful wooden door and gold leaf that says postmaster. And then above that, an artist was commissioned to do a painting. 1% of the building fund were set aside to pay for the artist. High quality art on the public building was the idea was to make art accessible to everybody. Artists were chosen through anonymous competition. And for smaller post offices, the jury might just simply be a postmaster, a member of a local architectural firm, and a prominent citizen. What they did, the artists were asked to submit design sketches. They were often encouraged to visit the post office site. Many artists, that wasn't possible. And then canvases were completed and often shipped to the post office where they would be put on the wall. There was often a lengthy negotiation involved in selecting these art. Some themes were unacceptable, and there also were certain parts that they said that the art had to do. It had to be scenes of local interest and events. It had to be show Americans at work or at leisure. Scenes of industrial America were encouraged. No scenes of tragic accidents, social realism, etc. And the purpose of the art was to celebrate the heroic and historical events and courageous acts in American history. This is an example here. This is a sculpture from the post office in Hamilton, New York, and it celebrated American builders. And you see the guy riveting, working on the skyscrapers and so forth. In Florida, I'm going to start showing you now some of the Florida examples. Florida and West Palm Beach, they opened their built the post office in 1936, as you can see by the postcard here on the upper left corner. And they opened it in 1937. And the artist Stephen Johannes won the commission to paint 6 panels for the building. By the way, the post office was demolished in 1979. The murals were saved, however, and they were moved to a new post office. And he was given the commission in 1939 to 1940 to do 7 murals. He paid his own way to West Palm Beach in 1939 to talk to the local officials and talk to the local residents. And they all told him the day when the mail carriers walked through the swamps and the sand and everything else to deliver the mail. So he did 6 panels called Tale of the Barefoot Mailman. And this, when the postmasters, when the post officials walked the mailman, it was a 68-mile route between Palm Beach and Miami. And Johannes returned to Connecticut, and he painted these canvases. Johannes is one of the most famous of the authors. He did 125 Saturday Evening Post covers, and he also designed 46 stamps. Well, these are his murals of the barefoot mailman. You show him rowing through the swamps past the herds of alligators. I don't think herd is the right word for group of alligators. I'm sure there's a more formal term for that. They show him walking with other people down the path or whatever the roads existed, carrying mail, the barefoot mailman. They show him walking by remnants of shipwrecks and other kinds of things. This is a picture of Stephen Johannes and some of the stamps he designed for the post office over the years. And I do have one cover example from Saturday Congregation. Thank you, Paul. And I do have one cover from Saturday Evening Post that he did in 1952 called Doing Dishes at the Beach. And I haven't decided whether this is satire or humor, and it certainly would be an argument for sharing of kitchen duties today in today's world. Another example of how an artist planned a mural is Marion Gilmore, one of the few women muralists. She got a commission for a post office in Corning, Iowa. And this is her design for the post office. And it has survived. And it was called The Band Concert. And she was supposed to portray an idealized view of a small town, showing the community listening to a band concert in the town square. And this is her preliminary sketch, which survived and it was transferred in 1974 to the Smithsonian American Art Museum. But it's not an accurate depiction of Corning Town Square, as far as the people were concerned. It shows a cannon on the left side of the bandstand and an obelisk, none of these of which actually existed in the park. And so the Treasury, along with local officials, urged her to change her drawing, removing certain items. And she ultimately painted this mural, which appeared in the post office. And if you compare the two, first of all, the bandstand has grown much larger. Um, there is more of a diverse audience if you look at the people around the bandstand listening to the concert. There's more of a diverse audience than previously. And there's a much lighter tempo, much more passion, I think, in this painting than in her original sketch. And so this is the kind of negotiation that often went on between the Treasury Department and the section that handled the art and the artists themselves. And as you can see, it's in a standard post office, again, over the door of the postmaster. And in this case, it actually frames around the door. So some of the murals actually went around the door rather than just being above it. I have another example. We'll go back to Florida, Fort Pierce, Florida. And Fort Pierce is on the East Coast. It's midway between Melbourne and West Palm Beach. And they had these are murals that were done for that post office, not just one, this one, and it was called Osceola Holding Informal Court with His Chiefs, and it was installed in the post office in 1938. Another one, Perry, Florida. This one was called Cypress Logging. It was by an artist named George Snow Hill, done in 1938. So all of these scenes are supposed to be things from the local community, the things that are going on historically as well as sociologically in a community. Sebring, Florida, which is in the middle of Florida, between Orlando and Lake Okeechobee, their post office had this one, which was called Prehistoric Life in Florida by Charles Knight, done in 1942. It is no longer in the post office. It was done in 1942, and it was moved. It's now in the public library there. So some of the murals have been saved if they could be taken off the wall and saved. Now turning to one of our local town, Florida, in DeFuniak Brewing, this is the post office building on the upper left that was built in 1938. And actually, if you drive through a lot of small town in Georgia, Alabama, and even Florida, you will find a building much like this. This is the exact, and there's one in Milton looked like this. This is the format, the building structure that was designed for the post office. And of course, inside there will be that door for the postmaster, and there would be a mural on the above it or surrounding the door. Now, they built this new post office in 1938. You can still see it today when you go down US 90, and it's been used. It was sold in around 2000, and it was sold, and it's now other businesses have used it. But this is the mural that was created for that post office in 1942 called Scene of the Town. And it pictured DeFuniak Brewing, the round lake, and some of the buildings that are around it. And these buildings, most of these are still around the lake in DeFuniak. And in fact, there was a competition in that. And he actually was a winner of the 48 state competition for this mural. And in 1989, it was moved to the new post office. And that's what this is. This is a picture of the mural in the new post office, which they again have managed to place above a door, so it fits what it used to look like. Milton, Florida also had a mural. Again, same kind of post office architectural design. The mural is above the door as if postmaster, and it's called Loading Pulpwood, and it's also by George Snow Hill. I showed you the other one that was called Harvesting um, Harvesting Cypress, and so this is the Loading Pulpwood, 1941, that he painted for that mural. George Snow Hill is kind of interesting. He graduated from the University of Syracuse, married, lived in Paris, and he moved back to the United States in around 1930. He did a number of these murals for post office. He is noted for the use of humor and color color and humor in his works. A piece he was doing for a courthouse in 1939 was halted because a judge objected to a skimpy bathing suit in the picture. He did 7 murals for Tampa Airport in 1939. They were restored in 1998, and they're hanging in the Tampa International Airport. Some of his cartooning style is called caricature, and as a result, he was subjected often to criticism of racist portraits in his painting. For example, in this painting that was in the Milton Post Office, on the left side, you have 2 African Americans, and they're playing dice. And it had been cited as an example of stereotypical racism that exists in some of his painting and others as well. In Tallahassee, Florida, the most don't have an example. I need to tell you a little more about him. In St. Petersburg, a man and his friends invaded the city hall in December of 1966 and tore down one of his murals, which showed black musicians eating watermelon and entertaining white on the beach. And he got a 3-year jail sentence for tearing down the mural, and he served half of it in and out of jails on appeal, and eventually led to the U.S. Supreme Court. And it was talked about again as late as 1999, but it led to a change in racial relation in St. Petersburg too. The Tallahassee Post Office had 8 murals. They were by a man named Edward Buck Ulrich, done in 1939. It had a whole group of them. They were finished and brought to Tallahassee, but before then they were taken to New York City and put on display, and then they were brought to Tallahassee in 1939. And I found an article in the Tallahassee Democrat which said none of the local officials had even heard about what the topics of these murals. But when they arrived in March of 1939, everyone loved him. And the artist, not known by his full name, he's known as Buck, B-U-K. So in the art world, it's Buck. And he gave a lecture on them, and I'll show you some of them today. So this one was Saturba receiving the French. Saturiba was a chief of an Indian kingdom of what is now Jacksonville, when the French Huguenots explored that area in 1562. Here's one. He did another one called, Francis Drake attacking St. Augustine. And so these are all called History of Florida. They tend to be history of northeast Florida rather than all of Florida. But there's eight of the murals. These are the best that I could find online. One of them will be called military. Upper left is called Military Governor Andrew Jackson. On the right is, of course, the Osceola. And on the bottom is, let me see what that one is. I'm not sure which one that one is. This one he called Aborigines, Buck titled it Aborigines. The interesting thing is it's been cataloged by the Florida State Library, and they gave it the title Bimini Island. Anyway, this was what was in the 1939 Jacksonville Post Office. This turned up in the Smithsonian, and this is a drawing, and I believe it's one of his drawings for one of the 8 murals of modern Florida. And you see golfing and sailing and other kinds of activities. It was probably a working sketch for whatever he put up. The Tallahassee Post Office was built in 1935, and it served as the main post office to the 1970s, and now it's used by the U.S. Bankruptcy Court. 110 East Park Avenue, Tallahassee, and these murals are still up on the wall of that courthouse. Um, the far right picture he titled The Five Standards on Parade, which were the five flags that flew over Florida. Oh, these were the Tallahassee local post office mural. Another one I want to share with you is this one from Lake Worth, Florida. This is the picture of what it looked like in the post office. It was painted for the new post office in 1940. And it shows called formal title is Settler Fighting Alligator from Rowboat. And it was painted by Joseph D. Myers. And later, Joseph D. Myers later in life abandoned post office mural for working in stained glass. He established a firm in Tampa and went on to design stained glass for churches, hospitals, high school, banks, and amusement parks. He passed away in 1989 at age 76. His depiction of all barred teeth and terrified faces, so it's a kind of irregular, unsettling mural. The manager of the Lake Worth Post Office in 2015 said that he felt sorry for the alligator if they let the dog go. Now, Myers and the bureaucrats' post office squabbled for years over the painting. The post office called the painting disappointing and said the dog was in no way convincing, and they had condensation on the wall and they had delayed putting it up. And so he painted it around 1940, but it didn't go up into the post office until 1946, and he didn't get paid his $1,000 commission until 1947, from almost 7 years after he made the painting. The Palm Beach post office had 3 canvas paintings in them. They depicted landscapes and Seminole Indian, and they were painted in 1938 by Charles Rawson, who was born in Pennsylvania and trained in New York City, and he was an impressionist turned modernist painter. He was co-founder in the 1930s of the Woodstock School of Painting and was commissioned by the post office to create 3 murals. He did an enormous map of the Hudson Valley for Beacon, New York branch, a contemporary view of Poughkeepsie, New York for that city's mail facility, and the Seminole Indian blocked on each side by the Atlantic Ocean and the Intercoastal Waterway for the Palm Beach station. Later in life, he limited his work to small drawings and pastel, and he died after a heart attack in 1950. The Palm Beach post office was sold in 2009 by the post office. The building privately owned today, but the Mediterranean style of it, as you see in this picture, is still on the National Register, and the lobby must be kept intact. And these are his 3 pictures of the Seminole Indians. I want to talk a little about some of the other post office murals around the country and a little bit about their story, because they're all interesting and they all have stories. This was Alpine, Texas, and the idea with the painting was to capture the advantage of a rural and urban life in a West Texas community. And the Twin Sister peaks in the back, they actually overlook Sul Ross State College, now called Sul Ross State University. And 3 people are reading, and the cowboy is catching up on animal husbandry, keeping a lazy eye on his cattle while his horse is nearby. The artist originally submitted sketches about Cabeza de Vaca reaching the region and prehistoric animals, and with local pictographs, but the citizen committee that was formed for the post office objected. They said the most important thing to them in their town in the 1930s was the college. And so the picture depicts both the area and the ranching and so forth, but then everyone in the picture is reading the identity of the community. And this one is Pocahontas, Arkansas. It was titled Early Days and First Post Office, 1939. I'm not sure where the painting is today, but as you can see, it originally cropped around the postmaster's door in the lobby of the post office. This is one of the painters, one of the artists was Julian Binford, and he often focused on rural African American life. And one of his first commissions was a mural of Jesus over the River Jordan for Shiloh Baptist Church, which he did in return for payment of chicken, corn, potatoes, and beef. But to earn real money, he signed up to decorate WPA building. He came in second place for a contract for a post office mural in Harrisburg because reviewers didn't like his portrayal of mules and Negroes. In 1941, he received a letter asking him to submit a design for a post office in Richmond, Virginia. He decided to do the burning of Richmond as the Confederate capital fell. And he submitted sort of a rough sketch, which was actually approved. But when his sketch actually was published in the newspaper in 1942, all hell broke loose. Obviously, there were a lot of consternation, and there were protests, letters of protest, and all, and they informed him that there was no more funding, and the project died. And I want to share this with you because these are kind of sketches from his mural. And if I can describe the sketch that he submitted, this is the sketch for the burning of Atlanta. A rider on horseback bears down on an unclothed woman lying in the street, lifting her arm to shield herself. To the rider's right, a man seems to be leaping out of a window. To the left, another man pushes a woman sprawled in a wheelbarrow. In the distance are the columns of the Virginia Capitol and the flames of fire and pandemonium. A leader of the Daughters of the Confederacy called it one of the most horrible things I've ever seen. Someone else said it was the tragic thing we're trying to forget. The newspaper objected to what appeared to be a naked woman, and what appeared to be a black looter. Um, and so someone said it would besmirch the reputation of slaves who remained loyal to the South. The looter actually on the left is actually a white woman holding her bundled baby, handing her bundled baby to a man in the street while she looked back in despair at her menaced home. Um, in any case, everybody, one of the complainers with the Methodist bishop, who was also a temperance leader, James Cannon Jr., he protested that the nude naked woman was not portrayed vividly enough in comparison with nudes he had seen in European painting. And the artist Julian Binford wrote back, when and how did this bishop become an authority on the back and hips of nude women? The wrangling continued to 1943, and they declared the Treasury finally declared it had no more money for this. We come forward 65 years, and the former post office building in 2017 is being renovated by a software company. They did research, found bits and pieces of the mural, the original sketch, and have blown it up and installed it in the former post office building that they inhabit. Well, that's why we know so much about this one. Now, a couple of other things I want to share about the murals, and you can still find them in post offices of today. Um, the Again, the post office issued the mural stamps in 2019. And the rest of the story starts around 2020, and an artwork group of high-level USPS officials began looking at some of the murals and directed facilities and personnel to cover up the murals at 16 post offices in 12 states. Some of them were considered with black plastic, even considered for outright removal. And when people asked what's going on, they really didn't get much information. I don't have much new to add to this, but I can show you what was going on 2 years ago. So Jackson, Georgia post office had this mural called Cotton from Field to Mill, and it was objected to because of the depictions of slaves and slavery in it, and so it became one of the covered up murals. And this was a August 2020 picture of what that mural looked like. I do not know whether it's still there or not. Luverne, Alabama had a mural called Cotton Field, painted in 1942 by a man named Arthur Getz. He actually was a fairly great artist. He did 213 covers for the New Yorker in 50 years between 1938 and 1988. It has been covered. One African American noted they saw this every time they visited the post office, and it did historically remind them of the hardships of their ancestors, but was accurate and encouraged the post office not cover it up. But nevertheless, the post office has zeroed this one out for removal or covering. In Madison, Florida, another painting by George Snowhill called Long Staple Cotton. It also had been under fire as well because it shows black workers, and there's something some people have found it offensive and have objected to it. And by August of 2020, that mural had also been covered up. The Theme of the South, 1942, by Laura G. Douglas. This is another painting that has had some objection to because of the depiction of slavery and black workers. I'm trying to look at my notes here, see if I have a note where that one come from. I don't have the date on it. Chester, Illinois have one called Loading the Packet. It was done in 1940. Described a daily life in the community during the peak of riverboat travel with children playing, family talking, dock workers loading the boats, cherished by the community. And at one time, the postmaster said that if the building caught fire, he would rather the mural rather than the mail be saved. Anchorage, Kentucky have one called Meeting the Train by Lauren R. Fisher. It was done in 1942. There's been some objection to this because of the way African Americans are portrayed on the far left of the picture. Cantonville, Maryland have a mural called Incidents in the History of Cantonville. It's a thing that wraps around 3 walls of the post office, encompassing 5 windows. And again, slavery is part of the picture, and there have been some complaints, and one that the post office was considering removing as well. Medford, Massachusetts, they actually covered up these with wood panels in the 1960s, but they were found and restored in 1993. In 1999, there had been a campaign to get them taken out. On the far right is the West Indies sugar press. And then in the center, you have slave labor hauling sugar cane. And the shackles are open to indicate how enslaved labels were freed. Slave people were freed in the North. Hazelhurst, Mississippi, Life in the Mississippi Cotton Belt, done in 1939. There have been some complaints about this one as well. Rhinebeck, New York, Scenes of Local History done by Olin Dowes in 1941. There are 12 panels. Panel 6 and 8, depictions of blacks, and the post office indicated they plan to cover up all 12 panels here. Lewisburg, North Carolina was another one on the list because it is called the tobacco auction. Virginia Beach, Virginia, the Old Dominion conversation piece done in 1939. It has some depictions in the background that have offended people on the far left, including slaves hauling the goods and pulling the roller and this type of thing. So that's the last of my slides I have to show you. I hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit about the post office mural. You will still find them in post offices throughout the South. So I encourage you, if you visit a town, you're on a day with the post office is open and it's an old post office, go inside and you may see some very interesting murals and paintings from the WPA project, from the Treasury Department project in the 1930s and 1940s. Are there any questions?
Dean, in the art museum in Memphis, there was at least one large painting, maybe more than one, by Thomas Hart Benton, and some of the style seemed of the murals you were showing made me think of Thomas Hart Benton, and I did a little Googling and Grant Wood also, and I did a little Googling and saw that both of those had also done, those artists had also done some post office murals around, but
I haven't found that anyone has ever done a directory of the commissions and the murals and compiled anything on them. I have found some small books where people have done murals of they put together a book of pictures of murals of their state, for example. And there's a few of those. I found a few of those. And some of these artists went on to bigger and better things. Their artworks are in museums all over the country. They're very collectible. They're very, they're just a really nice style. And yeah, you're right. The Thomas Hart Benton style is evident in these. You have to remember, a lot of these artists went to school and they were shown these and then they kind of adopted the technique. That's kind of how artists work.
right.
And so that I'm not surprised at all. I don't know if Thomas Hart Benton did any for the post office. It was a competition. The whole purpose of the program was to at least get some artists earned some money during the Depression years.
Thank you. Very interesting.
All right. All right. Thank you all very much for coming. And I think this will be videotaped. This will be recorded, and I think Kelly will have it up on the library website at some point. So thank you all very much for coming today. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dean.